Mini episode 1241 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
If it's a battle of hearts and minds, though, Jake Digman, and this is what I come back to, if this is about bringing us about, and you've seen poll results here, that like our fellow whites, if you will, like in almost unprecedented numbers, really sort of getting it as far as what registered with George Floyd, the excessive force, getting his neck kneeled on for 8.5 minutes, whatever. Like, this is one of these cases where, not to say that there hasn't been some whataboutism or some type of blaming the victim. I've seen both, but far, far less than usual. It does feel like a watershed moment as far as white people understanding that, yeah, this is and you mentioned, the Taylor case down in Louisville, and that, yes, these things happen, these things should not be happening, whatever. You want to build on the momentum of the moment. And I will tell you, as somebody who basically got race shamed a good chunk of my life, as far as, the presumption, scarlet letter R, this guy happens to be on the right side of the political spectrum and he's from Parma, must be a racist. Like, you're in this moment, the more I see it and the more I see people trying to cancel other people on stuff. And by the way, this is, whether it be Drew Brees or anybody else, anybody that wants to play contrarian at this point, you get what you deserve. Because if you can't read the room right now to realize that it's not a smart thing, whether or not it's a moral thing, then you're pretty stupid. But
I know one guy who can't read the room at all.
Well, yeah.
That's a bigger say.
Well, yes, exactly. But it's
one guy who should read the room isn't reading the room whatsoever.
Yes, and I think we talked about him a little bit before, and we may again here before we're done. And it's a thing where, again, this is, the whole thing here too, and I hate to borrow what is so often a woke phrase about teachable moment, but if you want to rip that from the pompous context that that's usually used in, this is something of a teachable moment. This is a moment where I think people are getting their eyes opened to this and to what happens and what the possibilities are in terms of the police and Black America and things that happen like that. So, again, going out there and pouncing on people for not being completely woke or not completely whatever, or you're part of the problem. If it's anybody who is legitimately, honestly struggling to get to a point of intellectual honesty about this and charity and compassion in their heart, then I can't even tell you how destructive it would be to jump on those people as they are trying to acclimate themselves to what's happening.
There's going to be a whole group that is never going to see whatever's there because they just believe so strongly in whatever it is that they're believing in, and you kind of look at it and go, why are you believing this?
Yeah.
It doesn't, we have to admit there's an entire group out there, and there's probably a group, there's some sects of different groups that go back to the policing that would want, all this chaos to happen, that aren't going to see it, and they're going to speak out, and do their thing. But the fact that, so many people came together and kind of have, are on the same page, and it's like, you can't, or that's where the issue came in. White people just wanted to ignore it. That's why they got so mad at Colin Kaepernick. They changed the narrative of what was happening there. They changed the narrative of the reason why he was taking a knee to what fit them as to, the reason for taking a knee. So, can I make a controversial statement on your show, Rick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There's an issue. I'm going to share a story of this. Anybody who says that, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee is disrespectful to the soldiers who died, I completely disagree for this reason. In the United States of America, that's the freedom that our forefathers and that our family members, they fought for the right for you to not stand. Every dictator, communist country, you were forced to stand. When you were forced to stand, all of a sudden, that is when freedom is taken away. way. People don't have to like it. I'm not saying I'm the one taking a knee. I know what the situation is. I've never done it. But I've also never been really, I've never really been the whole idea of patriotism means that your country is the greatest of all because you were born there. I was born here.
Yeah.
I can't, I love where, I love where I live. I love my family. I love all, at the same time, it's just bullshit. You call it bullshit. And I had a conversation one time with, dear friend who passed away. He was, last year, Woody. He was an inspector down for the OEC. And I had a conversation with him, and I said to him, I go, because we didn't do the national anthem at one point. This is like in 20, early in mass. And I said to him, and I go, he said, I went to war, so for you not to play the national anthem? Because I represent this country. I go, I'm like, you're disagreeing with me, but sadly, yes. It's not a popular point of view, but it's to represent a freedom. And once we take away the freedom to do that, that's when we're no different from anybody else. You don't have to like it. There are certain things you don't have to like it. And we look at it and go, okay, whoa, I wouldn't do that. Well, okay, you can't change the reasoning. And that's what got changed over time was the reasoning why this happened. And quite frankly, that entire side that we're just talking about are the ones that jumped on that made it just to the point where it's like, whoa, because let's face facts, the NFL, who's got the money? The white people. Who are the owners? They're all white.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are affecting everything and that are looking at it and going, well, next thing you know, you have the vice president walking out. You have the president of the United States calling them out on Twitter. I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought you had bigger things to do. And then, you get to that, and it comes back around, and you look at it, and it goes, now, the fact that the NFL has come out and said, hey, our bad. I also think a lot of these companies is, because this happens, unfortunately, just jumping on this for PR.
Yeah.
I mean, quite frankly, I was walking through Walmart, and Walmart had this huge thing talking about how over the air, how much they appreciate their African American customers and all this stuff. And I'm like, at what point does it become lip service?
Oh, there's a lot of pandering. There's a lot of branding and marketing in this whole thing. A lot of stuff that is just really shallow.
It's like you want to show that instead of just saying all this stuff, you want to show it, invest in these communities that we're all just got destroyed.
Well, exactly.
But
exactly. Well, no, but here's the thing, though, and this goes back to the point that I was making about willingness to tolerate differences, willingness to, and as I'm pleading for, as I think there is getting to be a better sense of understanding that the polls are showing a dramatic greater sense of understanding by white people as to some of these realities of being patient. And again, hearts and minds here, and you have to be able and willing to tolerate disagreements on stuff. I'd already stated on this. Inadvertently, you sort of made my case for me when you mentioned about your friend who went to war, who would have liked to have heard the national anthem played. See, I look at that side of the equation, and I think, gee, if there's any vets that would be offended by flag kneeling, then whatever, then I can't be an advocate for it. If there's any, because again, I really put them on the ultimate pedestal. People have fought for the country, died for the country, whatever. If it would offend any of them, then that to me is not a way forward on addressing this stuff. But I'm not going to jump down your throat for seeing it differently. A lot of people would jump down my throat and call me insensitive for not being an advocate for it. But that's, yeah.
It's just two different perspectives on it.
It is.
Respect, your reasoning. I mean, like I said, I can't tell them not to do it because the whole idea of a peaceful protest is something that's going to get people's attention. If you do a peaceful protest, and that's the same thing. That's why there's a lot of frustration now.
Right.
Every time people are trying to peaceful protest, the white people kept saying, no, don't do that. 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 To the point where it's like, well, what can you do without everybody getting their feelings hurt? And it's like, that's the problem. People focus too much on their feelings. Like,
well, they do, yeah. And that's,
there's no feelings on the side of it when when there's people that are dead, you're not having feelings. So, I mean, I agree, on your take on this. We're on the same, we are on the same side as that. It's just, it's funny, you were telling your upbringing earlier. Mm-hmm. I kind of laughed because you said, talking about coming from Parma.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's cool. You think, you got it. I went to Catholic school for 12 years.
Okay.
And, I grew up in Cuyahoga Falls.
Okay.
Or should they call it Caucasian Caucasian Falls.
I've heard it called that, yes.
At one point they did one of the Cleveland magazines or something did a political cartoon with the mayor of Cuyahoga Falls in like Nazi and KKK attire.
Wow.
My friends and I had a party at our house when I was we were in the early 20s. My buddy and our one friend came over, Jarrell, and he was that guy. And he called me, and I went down to his car. I thought he had to pick up some beer, right? I'm like, it was one time to be young again. And I got in the car, and I'm like, you just had a six-pack beer. I'm like, yeah, dude. I'm like, what's up? I'm like, can you carry something? He goes, no, man. I'm Cuyahoga Falls. I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, dude, I got you. I understand. And it's one of those things when I met people, and I've always been I like to think of myself as a sponge to the people around me. That's why I've afforded so many amazing opportunities in my lifetime that I've done,
right,
and places that I've gone and things that I've seen. And you have to understand, where people are coming. It's not about you. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people have is they want to make it about them. It's like, well, this is what I just know. It's not about you. It's not about what you see right now. And I've been fortunate in that I could, I understood his perspective. And to be quite honest, when I was in grade school, there was one black kid in the entire school, and he was several years younger than me. He was the son of a doctor or something. I didn't even go to school with anybody that wasn't white until I got to high school, St. V, and still it's St. V. So it's like diversity. I had to go out and meet people in the course of my life and have an understanding. And it's one of those things where so many people are so close-minded into this is where I come from, this is what I know, and this is the way it is. And you're talking earlier about the mayor up in Parma. It made me think of who's of Eastern European descent, and he knows a whole subset of a church that are super racist.
Yeah.
He doesn't go there, but he knows theirs. And it's just like, you look at that and you go, you are the people being oppressed in your own country. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Dude,
sorry.
you know what it is?
What is wrong with you?
It's human nature, because every group of people has got to have somebody else to shit on to feel better about themselves. I mean, that's psychology 101. It ain't.
Which is the fundamental flaw in humanity.
It is. It's
the flaw in humanity. It's like, I'm going to knock down you to make you feel better. And it's like, that's where nobody gets anywhere. And we fighting in the same vicious circle. While meanwhile, the ivory tower is looking down on it and going, yep, everything's working fine.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the unchangeable flaw in our DNA code. And there's 2 points I want to get to as I start to bring this full circle on what you just said there. One is what you're talking about as far as again, experiences with again, people who aren't used to being around minorities and whatever. This is one of the things that, again, in terms of keeping my ears open over a period of time and getting to a point where I can be at this point intellectually honest and say, yeah, there is a lot of stuff that sucks about the black experience in America. Part of it is that, and you've probably known this as well, people who will interchangeably, instead of calling somebody an a-hole, which they may or may not be, they'll racialize it. And like, oh, that N-bomb. And I've always thought in my head, like, why'd you have to go there? Like, I have a now former friend, a black guy that I was friends with many years, and he and I had some knockdown, drag-out fights. Never, ever, ever was the N-bomb on the tip of my tongue. I mean, he and I would be screaming back and forth, calling the other one an asshole and this and that and whatever, but never did it go there. So the whole thing of, and part of it is, and it's one of these things where the Civil War to Jim Crow to whatever, that whole kind of line of stuff there. And it's a thing where, like, our grandparents' generation, you have to be intellectually honest and say racist as hell. There were vestiges of Jim Crow even in the North. It was predominantly a Southern thing, but vestiges even in the North. The one thing I will say, though, is that I don't know that, we get enough credit for the evolution in society of where it is completely unthinkable now. Like, you and I, the average white person, certainly nobody that was alive at the time could believe it. Could even, the notion of signs that say colored drinking fountain or back of the bus or whatever, like, that is so completely foreign to any of us. It seems impossible to believe that it existed in our country, but it did, and quite frankly, it shaped a lot of people. There was this mass psychosis, mass hypnosis.
It wasn't that long ago,
It wasn't. It really,
the people
really...
are still alive. The people are still, the people who were around then,
Yeah.
like, a lot of people who are younger, they're still here. You know?
Right.
That's the thing. It's not a thing that was in ancient history. It wasn't that long ago.
Well, and that's the thing, and I remember having some discussions on the show, I think about as far back as '09 on this topic, and the observation was made then that, every generation is basically more tolerant than the ones come after because we are purging that. The generations that were, that racist and everything like that are not as evident, not as powerful anymore. Every new generation that comes along finds it all the more unfathomable that we were ever at that point. So we've evolved on that, and I think society deserves a good degree of credit for the fact that the likes of you and I could grow up not that far removed, not that many decades removed from it, and find it completely unfathomable as we are. So that's my one point, is that, again, that whole attitude just sort of pervaded, I think, generationally, and it's gotten mostly wiped out, but not all the way, and there is still progress to be made there. The other thing would be, too, and you mentioned about all those years of Catholic school. I mean, ironic in that, I went to CCD a number of years, but that was it for me. I never went to Catholic school, and yet I'm the guy that's the lifelong and practicing Roman Catholic. But it's a thing where, for anybody, whatever your whole thing is, and even for you, where I know that you are now, probably, I don't even know how you would classify it, but probably more so lower S spiritualist at this point, as opposed to religious, but whatever. Most belief systems out there, there's a commonality of it, of the more you understand it, unless it's like flat out Satanism or anything like that. Generally, the more...
No, there's, that's not true. But
well, okay.
There's some examples of Satanism that people actually do every day and not even realize it. But
okay, well...
And there's another topic for another time.
Yeah, definitely another time.
One of them is look out for your own.
Well,
and,
right.
Everybody does that.
But here's the thing, though. Is it like, when everybody's looking for answers right now, that's one of the simplest ones, and it's right in front of us. Because the more that I've gotten to understand, when they talk about the notion of, living your faith or whatever, like, golden rule, treat people how you would want to be treated, like, the more I find myself applying Catholic principles to things like this, and being willing to listen, hear people's stories, have empathy for people who've been through bad shit. Basically, the more I'm doing of that, the better off I am, the better off the people around me are. So, and again, I'm not just going to shill and homer for my own kind of a thing here, but most of us are a part of some type of, whether it be religious structure or something like that, where the more you're practicing it, the more you're living it, the more you're having that kind of positivity and empathy coming out of you, the better off you're going to be on this very subject, because that is sort of at the heart of how you address this very subject of race in this country, is having an open heart, an open mind, being willing to listen to people and having empathy.
It's one of those things where, you have to lift people up.
Yeah.
And no matter what it is, what your belief system is, if your belief system is, I don't allow you to condemn and put other people down because you think they're less than you, your belief system's broken.
Right.
Because no one's better than anybody else on this.
Right.
I mean, you have to look at, my father taught me a long time ago, before I went to work, he was, when I was going for my first job, so he's like, you treat the CEO the same way you treat the janitor.
Yeah.
Everyone, the same amount of respect until you get disrespected,
Yeah.
react in kind. And that's just kind of a philosophy that I've always had. But with people, and, everybody's a person. And that's kind of the centralized golden rule in all of these beliefs, is like, treat others as you would be treated. Like, I guess, you're going to go with mine in honor of what today is, like, be excellent to each other.
Well, yeah.
In honor of Bill and Ted dropping today, the new trailer for that. But,
well, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing, and unfortunately, we live in a world that has been filled with so much divisiveness and hatred, and it's a hatred towards, no matter what it is, everything has to be against something.
Right.
It's like, okay, you don't believe what I believe? Well, then you're wrong.
Right.
No. Here's why I feel the way that I feel. But I've learned, there was a point in time, 10 years ago, we were going on a whole tangent about me talking religion and being like, historical. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't do anything at the end of the day. I've learned if you're believing in something and whatever it is that you believe in, that's structure, and it provides you with something that is inherently good, and it makes you be a good person, no matter what it may be, don't take that from someone and don't discredit that. Just to fill your own ego, and to make your own ego feel like, I showed you. Honestly, some of the biggest a-holes I've ever met in my life are atheists, because they're terrible for that. And it's
Right.
like, I've met some great atheists, don't get me wrong, but there's some out there that are, the good ones because they leave you alone, they don't talk about it. It's like, we just don't have that conversation because one point,
Right.
it doesn't go anywhere. And it's like, that's just having an argument for the sake of an argument. But the worst ones are the ones, that come out there and they decide, how they're just going to insult and, you believe in this, and you're, the problem comes in just with that, where everybody gets, well, it's all over the world. We've got people, the whole Middle East war, I think it's absolute nonsense, but that's a whole other thing, where it's like, okay, you're fighting over land, well, you believe here, okay.
Right.
And it's been going on for and it trips into this country, and you look at it, you get these people who believe that, we brought you here. It's like, dude, what? Sorry.
Right.
Sorry. It's like, screw you, dude. It's like, you know what? No, you're not that. As a matter of fact, you're worse. You're
Right.
so much worse. Because you don't see what's like, we're trying to grow as a people.
Right.
If we continually are finding our differences and are bickering over them, and we have people in there, people that are in power, and it's not just the White House, it is all over, that, usually these influences that are there, like, just stir this shit up on both sides, and it's like, stop.
Right. Right.
It's like, I don't, it's the same cyclical disease that keeps happening over and over again. It's like, okay, so what's our solution to fix this up? We go into November, because, everything that has been, shoved down our throat, we've all been taught, like, the greatest freedom we have in this country is the fact that you have to be fought, dies, you have that right to vote, and it's your American duty. You're literally giving us an old, senile old man with functional tactics
Yeah.
against another senile old man who's absolutely out of touch.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Well said.
where's the diversity and option of looking forward, of like, moving forward and seeing, that's what every politician comes up with, like, America going forward, spoken by an old white dude. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you don't want anything to go forward. You want to maintain what has benefited you and, like, provided you with the life that you have been given. And you're going to say the things that your base needs to hear in order for you to get that. And quite frankly, Biden has it very easy. He could talk, and I look at this and go, it's like, out of all of the people you could have propped up there, that's the one you chose, and the reason why you chose that one is because that one is willing to play ball with you. It's like, this is the hard part that you probably could attest to, is being independent during all of this, is looking at it and going like, okay, you're full of crap, and you're full of crap.
Well,
and like,
yeah.
Which side do you want me to, like, let's not get the fact that you sabotaged, that the Democrats sabotaged their own candidate in the 2016 election. That happened,
Yeah.
Then on the other side of the course, but you got Trump, who's just, one step away from Pence, and I support that. So, and he's out of his, I think he's out of, I think, personally, I think he's losing his mind.
I do too.
I think he's like a
I don't know how you would explain some of this stuff otherwise. I would agree. I mean, and as somebody where, again, somebody definitely on the right side of the spectrum, but like I said, non-Trump voter last time, non-Trump voter this time, but nor have I ever defined myself, because again, I'm somebody that actually cares about policies and stuff. I've never defined myself as a never-Trumper, because that's not exactly true. You look at the record, you look at policies, whatever. There's a decent amount of policies, like I said before, judges, whatever, that I'm in favor of that he did. Not enough to get me to overcome the crazy and vote for him again. But this whole thing, it's on my side of the spectrum primarily with the Trump people. This is what it comes down to. Tribalism's bad on both sides. But as far as worshiping false gods, again, I don't think anybody on the Democratic side is too pro-Joe Biden. They'll vote for him because they hate Trump so much. But the whole, the worshiping of, Cheeto Jesus on the right side, I'm going to call that out because I have a number of friends who fall under that. Yeah, I mean,
so
that's...
mind-boggling.
Yes. Like you're actually worshiping a false god. You can say he's pushing all these things that are good for Christians and whatever. And look, and I think anything I agree with along those lines, it's purely out of cynicism on his part. He knows where his bread's buttered with the religious right and everything like that. So I'm not going to disagree on the policy side of it. But to clutch him to your bosom the way that you do, like he's a man of God, for the love of God, it's pure cynicism. Like you can take it in a bloodless kind of a way and be glad for any policy outcomes that you like, the way that I am, but these people personalize it and like, oh, Trump is the new Jesus. Like, I'll never understand that if I live to be 100.
Yeah, it makes absolutely zero sense when you look at who the person is that's behind it. And then you ignore all that. Like, oh no, he's been forgiven. You're like, no, like, you're being conned.
Yeah.
It's like you know, how do you absolutely, and, okay, but then again, it goes back to the statement I've said this a lot of times over the years. People will believe what they want to believe regardless of facts. If it fits their narrative, if it fits that situation, they're going to believe that. And especially, and that's one thing I got to give Trump credit to, that he has the ability to get that message out there. People will be like, yeah, I totally, his base jumps on.
Well, you know, again.
Like, I don't see how anybody who looks at this, like, you know, from an outside perspective, and goes like, this doesn't make, okay, like, none of this makes any sense. You'd think out of all of the options we've got right now that could go in there, you know, we could pick a better choice. I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, and that kind of tribalism is the enemy of figuring these things out racially and getting any kind of harmony.
Go Joe Jorgensen, the first female president.
Dude, that's right now. That's who I'm voting for. I've never voted for a libertarian candidate before, but I'm voting Joe. At least she's sane. You know, she's well spoken. Yeah, she. You know,
and I agree with her on policy.
Yeah. Me too, or at least a fair amount of policies anyways, enough so that I would. I normally vote Constitution Party when I don't vote Republican, but they nominated this real turd this time around, and I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So, yeah, Joe Jorgensen, it's so funny because we hadn't talked about this off air, but that's where I'm voting. But it's a thing where Trump, to go back to what you said before, learning how to cut, you know, pro wrestling promos. He is a WWE Hall of Famer after all, you know, and somebody else who should be and will be one day is a man who you were a contributor to a successful political campaign, Glenn Jacobs, a.k.a. Kane, down in Knox County, Tennessee. And that's the guy where, if you noticed that he tweeted out last week or the week before, that one diagram of, it was like in the middle of the diagram of all these things overlapping, you can be here. But it was all these things of like being against police injustice, believing that there are legitimately a lot of very good, police, but the bad ones should be prosecuted. There should be protests when there is police wrongdoing, but that looting and damage is wrong. It just ends up hurting innocent people. You could believe all of these things. It's the all of the above sort of approach to the situation. And that's the whole thing I think that we're talking about tonight, because this has been nothing if not a holistic kind of a conversation. And it's the kind of conversations that are needed all over the country right now, because you can't even necessarily just put it in the racial silo, because as you said before, there are class implications as well. There are other things about this as far as if you really want to understand and you really want to work to rebuild a better society, and I've always been somebody that's very idealistic in that way, listening, having conversations like this and everything like that is what you need to do. And it surprises me not one whit that a man with the native-born intelligence of a Glenn Jacobs, a guy as smart as he is, gets it and identified, I think, where we need to be.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, that's a strength of good leadership that, shows that you have to identify all facets of all sides of what's happening. You can't just, it goes back to, it's not cut and dry. As much as, they're trying to paint it black and white, it's not black and white.
Right.
There is, there's so much more to it that you got to look at it and feel like, yes, this is happening, and there has to be an accountability to the police that are doing this, and anybody that that goes back to the reform, and then police do needs to be busted up. I mean, I'm not I posted a thing on Facebook that I've had negative experiences in my life with unions. I know there are good ones out there. I know people that are part of them, and I get that. I've also seen the part where it benefits those that the people who are doing wrong benefit from it because they're protected by this idea of
Yeah.
They're, to sit back and for people to look at it and say, well, you're either this or this. Like, no. It's like they're on both sides. It's, this is an issue, this is an issue, and this is an issue. Like, if the road has a giant hole in it and the building is also on fire, we still have to address both of them. We don't just change everything because of that.
That's an excellent point. I actually saw that discussion on Facebook. I didn't join in it because I saw the way it was going, but I agree with everything you're saying, and I have the same skepticism of unions in the year 2020, and as far as how they exist, what they do, and a point that I would even add on top of that, the political contributions that they make. They many times contribute to politicians that the rank and file members don't support. But it is thought that the union should do it for the advancement of the union as it's perceived or whatever, notwithstanding how the union members are going to vote. So there's all kinds of things like that. I agree with where you're coming from, but that's where, again, having good conversations, honest conversations, it really sort of is that simple, and having a willingness to listen. And I've even seen some things, and it's so funny because I go back to it too. It's typically more so, I think, woke white people where I've seen it coming from. Like, oh, you want black people to explain things to you. Well, they shouldn't have to at this point after everything. Okay, but I mean, if that's going to be the attitude, like, how are people ever gonna learn if they're not, willing to talk about the experiences, to listen to people that are willing? I'm not saying beat somebody over the head with it. But if there are white people out there that are legitimately curious and like, hey man, I want to understand this a little bit better. Can you tell, maybe you've talked to me about it before, maybe I wasn't receptive before, or whatever. Would you do it one more time? Like, it needs to be a two-way street as far as having conversations and stuff like that. And like I said, getting to hearts and minds, because, nothing is really going to change until the momentum of white people really understanding a lot of this kind of stuff, which is where we've advanced in the last couple of weeks. That's where something can be built off of it. And you lose that momentum, you go backwards if too many of these people are shamed, like, oh, you're not being a maximalist on what I think we should do, you're a bigot. I see too much, it's the toxicity of social media that I see that right now.
Yeah. I saw a great interview last night with Antoine Bolden, who was on Trevor Noah,
Mm-hmm.
and he was one of the members of the Players Coalition in the NFL, and basically to bring up like social justice issues and stuff that's going on in the world right now, and he was out there promoting that with several players in the league that are a part of it. But he brought up a valid point in the fact that because there's no sports and there's no concerts, there's no nothing. There's no distractions really. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of people have really jumped on this movement is because there's nothing out there to distract them.
Right.
And people are so distracted right now that there isn't anything. So it's like, oh, well, this is happening.
Well, by the way, though, what there still is, and the reason that everything was shut down, to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, oh yeah, by the way, the coronavirus, we are still in a global pandemic. We are still in a situation where it is raging out there, not nearly with the intensity as in April. That's clearly understood, but it hasn't gone away. You're starting to see more spikes in other type areas. And oh, by the way, what was one of the things that we were hearing about it when it was raging the worst? That it disproportionately affects minority communities. So it doesn't make me an insensitive person to look at these marches and the way that a lot of them are structured. And I'm including the peaceful ones in it. I've seen images in Philly and in L.A. of people, just for miles down the street. And I wouldn't think anything of it under any other circumstances, because it's like, oh, that looks like the NFL draft the year they were in Nashville when they had a couple 100,000 people or whatever. And you don't think anything of it. Right now, I'm horrified, because I'm like, ugh, how many of those people are going to catch coronavirus from this thing here? Like, that's a very legitimate concern too. And that, the masks, the social distancing, if you're going to be out there and whatever, I'm not saying nobody should be doing it. But if people aren't doing it anywhere in this country, not mindful of the fact that we're still in a global pandemic, it's irresponsible, because you can hurt other people by carrying it to them, even if you don't get it yourself. That's been a good part of my mentality as far as bunkering down the last couple months. I don't want it on my conscience that I'm going to give it to everybody. And again, that goes back to what we said before, the whole thing of like, if people only thought more about other people, generally thinking we'd be a lot better off in this way, and certainly in a racial way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see the fallout of this. Of like, is there going to be a lot more, of the
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the times following this, just to see, in the next 2 weeks where it goes, because there's a lot of people that is not social distance all over this country.
That's an excellent point.
I guess we're going to see one way or another what the severity of this virus is.
Well, and I'm seeing.
I'm not one of those that's like, I'm not one of those like, oh, it's all a hoax and all that crap. Like you.
Well,
I have, my family, I have people that I care about that can be more affected by this than I am. So I followed all the guidelines. I see the reason behind it. But looking right now, it's like, okay, we're going to see, because there's a whole other side that's completely, there's people that were marching around with guns for some reason. We were talking about that. So I thought that was weird.
Well, shamefully, a lot of the, what I would call the branch COVIDianism here, the denialism of the virus, once again, a lot of that, I must admit, coming from my side of the spectrum, and it's the hardest core of the pro-Trump people who are just pissed in an infantile way that it appears to be interfering with his re-election, although I would argue that how he's handling it has had a lot more to do with it than the infections itself. But it's a thing where this whole thing, they're doing the neener stuff. Because when it was, white weekend warrior militia guys who, believe me, I wanted to punch them in the face when they were doing things like taking their guns into the state capitol in Michigan and that kind of stuff. I was pretty pissed off when the anti-lockdown protests were happening. They're doing the neener stuff right now about that. Oh, now all of a sudden protests are okay. That's one of the things I hate the most about what the public health officials have done, is they've actually, I'm not saying given the high moral ground to these jerks, but it is something where many of them have blatantly contradicted themselves on the whole thing, like, oh, these kind of protests are harmless. Actually, no, the disease doesn't discriminate against what kind of protest it is, and it's irresponsible and dangerous to say otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you.
So, but again, people got to be intellectually honest, and I think that's one of our, we're making a lot of points here, but that's not, if you're looking for a single catch-all, that's not a bad one. Be intellectually honest, be willing to listen, be willing to talk, be willing to, basically whatever. Just, open yourselves, open your hearts, whatever. Good things will come from that. And this is one of these things where, again, I've sort of struggled to enunciate exactly what it was that made me know that this segment would be the grand slam with you that it's been. But I think I finally stumbled on the right word. There are a few people I know that are more open than you, Jake Digman, all the way around. One of the most open people. You are an open book, open whatever. You'll have whatever conversation with anybody. You'll consider whatever kind of point of view. And that's basically it. That's who you got to do a segment like this with. And that's why it crushed it the way that it did, as I knew it would.
I appreciate the compliment, and I try to be that way. That just that goes back to being a product of my environment, of learning and being. And when I had to be that way. Like I got dropped into this. I got dropped into the world of mixed martial arts as a young kid, going, oh crap, who couldn't fight his way out of unless it was a work,
Yeah.
Like I'm dropped into this whole culture, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I grew up and learned, and I adapted, and I also have the benefits of being a part of that culture. Being part of that culture, we always like, we're like Fight Club. That we look at it in the tide. People are, you don't see, you see adversity because everyone says, oh, I don't see color. You're full of crap. Everybody does.
Right.
Like I hate that. Like I see people. You know what? I see people, and with people, you see the different facets of people, and you find those things that you have in common with people, and that's how you bond. And I've been fortunate enough throughout the course of my life, different places of going, knowing people from different cultures, that I've been able to have a vast appreciation for that culture. I don't really come from a set culture other than American, I guess.
Right.
That I wasn't raised with the Italian grandfather or the I didn't the Irish. I didn't have that. It was all just American. My great grandfather had on his in his apartment.
What?
In his house, he had a cross. He had a picture of Ronald Reagan, and he had the Duke.
Okay. Yeah.
That was just
3 for 3.
It was just American right there.
Yeah. That's fine with me. I ain't mad at that.
You know, so it's just like that's so. I've been blessed in that I've been able to meet so many people and be open-minded to experience these other cultures. But you know, one of the greatest examples of opening your mind to other cultures was the late Anthony Bourdain, and that he did that through food. I mean, that's one of the things I'm so grateful for, if nothing else, through all of this, is the amount of food and different things that are enjoyable.
Right.
And as you see the good in everybody and say, oh, okay, so quick is everybody quick to point and be like, I don't like you because you're not. And it's like, you know what? Okay, that's you're closed-minded and you're part of the problem. We need to weed that.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to weed that kind of thinking, and we need to open things up and to be more of, you know, just, I really wish we could get into people see things from an economic standpoint, and that how, you know, if we come together, there's more of us than them, and that we can actually grow. But I don't know if that can be possible the way the world is right now. I absolutely love for that to happen, but unfortunately, you know, it's like everyone's a sleeping dog right now. They're just constantly getting poked. They're just snapping. And
Yeah.
one thing leading to another, which, quite frankly, for the first time in my lifetime, realistically, I've looked at this going, okay, is this it? Or are we going into like the second Civil War?
Yeah.
This is what's happening right now. I don't think I'm being a conspiracy nut by looking at the world around us and thinking, okay, you know, how's it going up there, Trudeau?
Yeah, well, I mean, and this is one of these things where you look at it, and I've had a lot of moments of fear the last couple months, ever since the coronavirus crisis started. The combination of not merely a pandemic, but a depression-like economic circumstance coming from it, now this on top of it. I mean, I've seen stuff recently, you know, people making, I think I retweeted one of these jokes about 2020 is like if 1918 and 1968 had a baby. Yeah, but you know what? You got to throw 1932 in there too, or whatever year you want to pick out from the Great Depression. Like, this is the Spanish-American flu, the Great Depression, and the riots/unrest of the 60s all in one toxic brew. I don't blame you for being scared, because I'm scared as hell too.
It's like, what, you know, it's like, okay, how do you come back from that?
Yeah.
Just looking at it, it's like, oh man, I saw a pie chart or something. I think I shared it online. It was like all the different things. And it said, with your powers combined, I am 2020.
Yeah.
And it was Captain Planet. So it was like all the like the Spanish flu, and it was the race riots, and then it was, you know, the Great Depression, and all these different things. It was 5 of them. I can forget what the other 2 were. But it's like, holy crap! It's like it's mind-boggling. Like, I think back, you know, the mentality that I had in 2008 when I was very much a champion of, think outside of the two-party system, and it's a two-party dictatorship and all this stuff. And now I'm like, oh my God, there's like an active military our police has active military powers, and I would not be shocked whatsoever if come November all of a sudden, you know, martial law somehow got instituted as a result of what's going on in this country. And I'm not saying that to incite fear. I'm just saying it going like, the way things have gone, that would surprise me.
Well, yeah, I mean, that I wouldn't, only in the sense that I wouldn't bet against anything right now. I mean, what it would take to get from here and there is unfathomable, but it was unfathomable at the beginning of the year that we would have a global pandemic or a depression or this level of unrest in this country, and we got all three. So, you know, nothing's off the table, Jake Digman.
We got murder hornets, man.
Murder hornets.
Murder hornets, it's absolutely crazy, but it's hopefully this is a moment for people that, and I really, you know, goes back to giving, like, you know, faith in people, I guess.
Right.
Or hopefully this is a moment more and more people wake up and see, okay, this is what's happening here, and they open their eyes and realize it. Because you can't force someone to do it. It just has to affect them in a certain way, and they have to see it, and they look at it, they step outside the box and look at it and go, okay, yeah, now I feel like I've been played for a very long time.
Well, and that's the thing. There's more that unites us than divides us. And that is a thing where, again, hopefully that will be, you know, maybe that's the end game for this thing, is that what we should be realizing we may come to cling to as a survival instinct. You know what I mean? Like at a certain point in time, if we get scared enough, we may not be able to continue going down this path just because of fear of where we're at. That might open hearts and minds too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just, I mean, we've got to continue with that idea, or else, what's the point, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, and that's part of the whole thing with this show of, there's always, whenever we're talking about anything more serious, it's always from an optimistic and idealistic perspective of how can we wade through this, how can we try to make sense of this, and try to have some answers on stuff, and again, or ideas for answers, as this kind of is tonight. Again, I'm not saying that this kind of conversation that this has solved the world's problems or anything like that, but I'm proud to say it's a model for what should be happening all over the place with people talking to each other, hearing different things, learning from each other. So I'm very, very proud of that, and more importantly than that, more appreciative than I can tell you, because as high as my expectations were, this has still somehow exceeded them, which is a common occurrence with you, Jake Digman, and that is always appreciated.
I appreciate the compliment. It's always good chatting with you, Rick. It's to be able to discuss this issue because we came right out in the open and all out there. We're not the experts. Matter of fact, I like how you started this. We're not the two best people to be talking about this. We're not. But it's, we have a view and we have our own perspective on where we come from and how we got there. And as more people learn from that, maybe we can, grow. And that was, people need to sit down, do less talking, more listening.
I think so.
And you might learn some things. I
think so. And I think that is definitely the case, and that's the tone that we're trying to set with this kind of thing here. And if you think back on it, this should put a smile on your face. I mean, the initial thing when Jason Jones and I, the co-creators of this thing, when we conceptualized this in late 2006, what we were thinking was, because at the time, this is simply a spin-off of FantasyDraftHelp.com and some of the fantasy shows we were doing at the time, of the thing of, what if we tried to talk about everything the way that people talk about, breaking down the aftermath of a sports game? And so I would like to think that over the course of time we've been able to do that across the board. I know we did in this situation under, I don't want to pat myself on the back by saying thankless circumstances, but in this climate where people are always looking to jump on you, and I'm sure I still gave people some stuff to be outraged about, although I couldn't fathom what that could possibly be. But like I said at the beginning,
people will find anything. If they get mad, they're going to get mad.
Right. But your willingness to concede that point and come on with me and risk backlash yourself, like I said, you're one of the bravest people I've ever broadcast with. So, that was one of the things that quickly came to mind on why it had to be you. So, like I said, always appreciated. We'll be doing this some more as we go forward here. We just got the news that our boy Stipe Miocic is going to be defending the World Heavyweight Championship in August. We're going to have to talk about that as time goes along here.
You should come down and watch the fight. Then we can do a show right afterwards.
We could. Yeah, we could. I'll have that to look forward to. I appreciate it, and always great to be having the conversations with you, Jake, as this one was. As I say, more appreciated than I could tell you. And in the same vein, thank you, everybody, for checking out this mini episode of the FDH Lounge.